Story 1. Brandon Anthony Micah Bernard was born on July 3, 1980, in San Antonio, Texas. His mother, Thelma Louise Johnson, worked as a nurse in the United States Army. His father was Kenneth Richmond Bernard. Brandon had two younger siblings. When Brandon was a young child, his mother was transferred to Alaska for her Army job. Because of this, the family moved to Fairbanks, Alaska in 1982. They lived there until November 1984. Then the family moved again to Killeen, Texas. Brandon spent most of his childhood in Killeen. As a child, Brandon had asthma. In 1986, he went to school at the Seventh-day Adventist Academy. During the summer of 1987, the family traveled to Colorado so his mother could do medical training. In September 1992, something happened at home. Brandon's father had been drinking. He sprayed Brandon's mother in the face with mace. The couple divorced in 1993. In 1994, Brandon's cousin, Mel Simeon Pollock, came to live with the family. In early 1995, Brandon and his cousin began breaking into houses and stealing things. This was the start of Brandon's criminal behavior. Because of his rebellious acts and the trouble he caused, Brandon was moved back and forth between his parents' homes. He was also sent to several different schools. In 1995, he spent 5 months in a juvenile detention facility in Brownwood, Texas. Around this time, he became a member of a neighborhood gang called the 212 Piru Bloods. In 1996, Brandon tried to find a job, but he was not able to get one. In 1997, he earned his GED. Then he enrolled as a senior at Killeen High School for the 1997 to 1998 school year. While he was at Killeen High, he got decent grades and attended school regularly. During the summer of 1998, Brandon tried to join the United States Army. He was rejected because of the juvenile offenses he had committed when he was younger. Brandon was 18 years old in June 1999. He was still living in Killeen, Texas. He spent time with 4 other young men: Christopher Andre Villalva, who was 19, Terry Terrell Brown, 17, Christopher Michael Lewis, 17, and Tony Sparks, 16. On the afternoon of June 21, 1999, the 5 of them went to a gas station. They saw a couple filling up their car. The man was Todd Bagley, 26 years old. The woman was his wife, Stacy Bagley, 28 years old. They were youth pastors at a local church. The 5 young men approached the Bagleys. They asked the couple for a ride. The Bagleys agreed to give them a ride. But the young men had a plan to rob the Bagleys. They did not tell the couple this. When the Bagleys got into their car, Christopher Villalva pulled out a gun. He pointed it at the couple and forced them into the trunk of their own car. The Bagleys were locked inside the trunk. Villalva then drove the car with the others following or riding along. For several hours, the group drove around with the Bagleys in the trunk. There was a small opening between the trunk and the back seat. Through that opening, Todd and Stacy Bagley spoke to the young men. They urged them to accept Jesus into their hearts. They asked the young men to spare their lives. While the Bagleys were still in the trunk, the group robbed them. They took the couple's ATM card and withdrew cash. They stole money, jewelry, and Stacy's wedding ring. They tried to pawn the ring. Later, the group drove to a recreation area near Belton Lake. They pulled the car to the side of the road. Someone poured lighter fluid inside the car while the Bagleys were still in the trunk. From inside the trunk, Todd and Stacy sang the hymn, "Jesus Loves Me." Then Christopher Villalva fired a gun into the trunk. He shot Todd Bagley in the head. He shot Stacy Bagley in the head. Todd died instantly from the gunshot. After the shooting, Brandon set the car on fire. The fire spread quickly. The exact cause of Stacy's death later became disputed. Some medical findings said she died from smoke inhalation caused by the fire. Other findings said she was already medically dead from the gunshot wound before the fire started. After setting the fire, the 5 young men ran down a hill to get to Brandon's car. They tried to drive away, but Brandon's car slid off the road and went into a muddy ditch. They were stuck and tried to get the car out. People nearby saw the fire and called for help. Firefighters and first responders arrived at the scene. When the fire was put out, they found Todd and Stacy Bagley's bodies in the trunk of the burned car. The 5 young men were still at the scene trying to free the car from the ditch. The first responders detained them. The first responders who arrived at Belton Lake that night found the burned car with the bodies of Todd and Stacy Bagley in the trunk. They also found 5 young men nearby trying to free a different car from a muddy ditch. The 5 were Brandon Bernard, Christopher Villalba, Terry Brown, Christopher Lewis, and Tony Sparks. Because the bodies were discovered and the 5 were present at the scene, they were immediately detained. The police investigation began that same night. The crime had taken place on land connected to Fort Hood, a United States Army installation. Because of this, the case was handled in federal court rather than in state court. Investigators gathered physical evidence from the car, the scene, and the items taken from the Bagleys. They also collected statements from the 5 individuals. In 2000, Brandon Bernard went to trial. He was charged with carjacking, conspiracy to commit murder, and 2 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution presented evidence that he set the car on fire after the shootings. The jury found him guilty on all charges. On June 13, 2000, he was sentenced to death. Christopher Villalba was tried separately and also convicted. He received a death sentence as well. Terry Brown and Christopher Lewis both pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Each was sentenced to 248 months in federal prison. Tony Sparks was initially sentenced to life without parole, but because he was a juvenile at the time of the crime, his sentence was later reduced. Another youth, Gregory Lynch, who had provided the handgun used in the murders, pleaded guilty to a related charge and received a 5-year sentence. Brandon Bernard spent the next 20 years on death row. He filed appeals, and for many years the federal government had a moratorium on executions, meaning no federal executions were carried out. In 2019, the government announced that federal executions would resume. Bernard received an execution date. In the months leading up to the execution, controversy grew. 5 of the 9 living jurors who had voted to convict Bernard asked that his sentence be changed to life in prison. A former federal prosecutor, who had once argued for upholding the death penalty, also spoke in favor of commuting the sentence. She pointed to studies showing that 18-year-olds lack the impulse control of older adults, and that Bernard had a clean disciplinary record during his 20 years in prison. Bernard's lawyers filed last-minute requests to delay the execution. They asked the United States Supreme Court to intervene. On December 10, 2020, the Supreme Court rejected the requests. Justices Stephen Breyer, Elena Kagan, and Sonia Sotomayor noted their dissent. That same evening, Brandon Bernard was executed by lethal injection at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. Before the procedure began, he spoke his last words. He apologized to the Bagley family. He was pronounced dead at 9:27 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Christopher Villalba was executed on September 24, 2020. Terry Brown was released from federal prison on January 6, 2020. Christopher Lewis was released on June 23, 2017. Tony Sparks remained in prison with a scheduled release date in 2030. Gregory Lynch was released on December 16, 2008. The story of the murders of Todd and Stacy Bagley and the legal proceedings that followed came to a close with the final execution of the last person sentenced to death for their deaths. Story 2. Luke Mitchell was born on July 24, 1988 in Scotland. He was the second child in his family. He had an older brother. When Luke was 11 years old, his parents separated. After the separation, he was raised by his mother, Corinne, in the town of New Battle. The family lived in comfortable circumstances. Luke went to St. David's RC High School in Dalkeith. In his early years at school, Luke was known as a well-mannered boy. He dressed smartly and had hobbies such as army cadets, horse riding, and motorbikes. Teachers and other pupils saw him as a normal teenager. About 1 year before the summer of 2003, Luke changed his appearance and interests. He started dressing in the goth style. He grew his hair long and wore black clothes. Around the same time, he began using cannabis regularly. By the time he was 14, he was smoking cannabis every day, often during or after school. His behavior at school also changed. He got into trouble more often. He had fights with other pupils. Some of his teachers noticed that his schoolwork started to include violent themes and an interest in Satanism. His English teacher became concerned about the things he wrote in essays. In one essay he wrote about questioning God and added that people like you need satanic people like me to keep the balance. In another essay he wrote that following the teachings of Satan did not mean he needed psychiatric help. The teacher referred the matter to a guidance teacher because she thought the writing showed worrying signs. Luke also showed a knife to a fellow pupil and told him he knew the best way to slit someone's throat. To another peer, he said he could imagine getting stoned and killing someone. These statements were known to people around him, but at the time they were seen as strange talk from a teenager. At home, Luke had an unusually close relationship with his mother. Even as a teenager, he shared a bedroom with her. Jody Jones was born in 1989 in East Houses, Scotland. She was the youngest of 3 children. Her parents were James and Judy Jones. The family was working class, and both parents worked for the Royal Mail. Jody was known as a bright and strong-willed child. She enjoyed painting and writing poetry. She was especially close to her older sister, Janine. In 1998, when Jody was 9 years old, her father died by suicide. The loss caused great distress to the family. Her mother stopped working to care for the 3 children. Jody's older sister went to stay with their grandmother for a while, but later returned home. As Jody grew into her early teens, she went through a rebellious phase. She dyed her hair in bright colors such as pink or green. She developed an interest in heavy metal bands like Metallica. By the age of 14, she had tried marijuana and alcohol. She also self-harmed, which was known to those close to her. Luke and Jody were in the same year at school. They started a romantic relationship around February 2003. Both were 14 years old. Jody kept the relationship secret from her family at first, only telling her older sister. In May 2003, Luke met Jody's family for the first time. Jody became very attached to Luke. She wrote in her diary that she thought she was truly in love with him and that she would die if he finished with her. At that time, Luke was also in a secret relationship with another young woman, but Jody did not know about it. The other girl believed she was Luke's girlfriend and only found out about Jody later. Luke and Jody often met by walking through a stretch of woodland between their homes. One of the paths they used was called Roan's Dyke Path. In the weeks before the summer of 2003, Jody's mother had restricted her from going out because she discovered Jody had been taking drugs. That restriction was lifted on June 30th, 2003. On June 30th, 2003, the restriction on Jody's movements was lifted. That afternoon, at around 5 p.m., Jody left her home. She told her family she was going to meet Luke. Before she left, she sent Luke a text message. A relative of Jody also spoke to Luke on the phone and told him that Jody was on her way to meet him. Luke knew she was coming. Jody took the usual path through the woodland to reach Luke's house. That path included a stretch called Roan's Dyke Path, which ran alongside a high stone wall. She never arrived at Luke's home. Later that evening, Jody had not returned, and her family grew worried. Around 10 p.m., A search party was organized by Jody's family to look for her. Luke joined the search party. When the group reached the area along Roan's Dyke Path, Luke went straight to a V-shaped gap in the wall. He climbed through the gap and immediately looked to the left. He found Jody's body in the wooded area behind the wall. The time was approximately 10:30 p.m. Other members of the search party later said that Luke did not seem surprised or emotional when he found the body. They said he went directly to the gap without hesitation, and that his dog did not lead him there. Luke claimed his dog had stopped at the gap, and that was how he knew to go through, but others disputed this. The condition of Jody's body showed she had been attacked with severe violence. She had been punched in the face. Her neck had been compressed. She was then killed with a knife. After she died, her neck was slashed many more times. Her clothes were removed, and her trousers were used to bind her body. She had stab wounds to her abdomen, breast, and mouth, and her eyelids had been cut. The attack was described by forensic experts as frenzied and carried out by someone in an extremely angry state. At the scene, a tree nearby had the initials LM and JJ carved into it. After the body was found, police began their investigation. Within a short time, they focused on Luke. Several facts became noticeable. A knife that Luke was known to carry regularly had disappeared after the murder. Police could not find the knife. They did find the pouch that the knife had been kept in. On the pouch, Luke had written Jody's initials JJ, along with 1989 to 2003, which were her birth and death years. He had also written a quote, "The finest day I ever had was when tomorrow never came." The prosecution later viewed this as an indication that he had marked the pouch after the killing. A camouflage coat that Luke had been seen wearing on the day of the murder also disappeared. Neighbors reported seeing Luke's mother burning items in the garden on the night of June 30th. The mother later said she might have been burning Pampa's grass. After the coat vanished, Luke's mother bought him a new coat that looked identical to the missing one. She denied that the original coat had ever existed. 5 months after the murder, Luke's mother gave him a new knife as a Christmas present, replacing the one that had gone missing. Phone records showed that Luke had called the speaking clock service at 4:54 p.m. on June 30th. If he had been at home as he later claimed, he would have been able to see the time on a clock. The call suggested he was not at home at that time. When asked about the call, Luke could not explain why he made it. Around 4:50 p.m., witnesses saw 2 people who looked like Luke and Jody at the East House's end of the path, near where Jody started her walk. About 50 minutes later, 2 other witnesses saw a person resembling Luke at the New Battle end of the path, near his home. Those witnesses said he appeared to have been up to no good. Luke told police he had not contacted Jody after she failed to meet him because he thought she had gone off with someone else or had been grounded. But police noted that a relative had already told him Jody was on her way, and that the 2 had met almost every night before. His explanation did not match the facts. When Luke was interviewed, he mentioned seeing a distinctive hair fastening on Jody's body. That detail was not readily visible to someone who had just come upon the body in the dark. Police also observed that Luke identified the type of tree near where Jody was found, even though the area was dark and thick with trees. On the night of the murder, before he joined the search party, Luke returned home at around 10 p.m. Neighbors reported seeing smoke and smelling an unusual odor coming from the Mitchell garden around that time, and there was evidence that a log burner had been used. 2 days after the murder, Luke purchased a copy of the Marilyn Manson album The Golden Age of Grotesque, which contained a short film called Doppelhers. The film included images of bound women and themes of abduction. Luke's older brother later provided information that contradicted Luke's alibi. The brother said he had been at home on the afternoon of June 30th and had viewed pornography on the computer. He said he would only have done that if he thought the house was empty, meaning he did not believe Luke was home at the time. Computer records confirmed the pornography viewing. The brother had originally given a statement supporting Luke's alibi, but later admitted he had discussed with his mother what to tell police, and that his first statement was not accurate. Luke's mother had told police that Luke was at home cooking dinner at the time of the murder. The brother's later testimony showed this was not true. In the days following the murder, Luke made plans to go away for 2 weeks with the other girl he had been secretly seeing. That girl did not know about Jody until she heard the news. After Jody's body was found on the night of June 30th, 2003, police began a large-scale investigation. They spoke to more than 1,000 people, visited hundreds of homes, and stopped hundreds of motorists in the days that followed. Detectives treated the case as a murder inquiry from the start. Luke was first questioned as a witness. As police gathered statements from neighbors, friends, and schoolmates, inconsistencies appeared in what Luke told them. Officers noticed that the coat and knife Luke had been seen with regularly were no longer present. His mother's actions on the night of the murder, including burning items in the garden, became known to investigators. The phone call to the speaking clock at 4:54 p.m. on June 30th was discovered through phone records. Witness accounts placed Luke near the path around the time Jody would have walked there. 10 months after the murder, in April 2004, police arrested Luke and charged him with murder. He was also charged with carrying a knife in public and with supplying cannabis. During the investigation, police questioned Luke on one occasion without a solicitor present. Years later, a court would rule that this particular interview was improper, but the judges also determined that none of the key evidence against him came from that interview. Luke's trial began at the High Court of Justiciary in Edinburgh in late 2004. It lasted 42 days, which was a record for a single defendant in Scotland at the time. Luke pleaded not guilty. His defense was an alibi. He said he was at home cooking dinner when Jody was killed. The prosecution presented its case step by step. They showed the knife pouch with Jody's initials and the quote. They presented witnesses who had seen Luke wearing a camouflage coat on the day of the murder and confirmed the coat had disappeared afterward. Neighbors testified about seeing smoke and burning in the Mitchell garden on the night of the killing. Phone records were shown, including the 4:54 p.m. speaking clock call. Witnesses from the search party described how Luke went directly to the gap in the wall and found the body without searching, showing no emotion. The tree with the initials LM and JJ carved into it was presented as evidence. Luke's brother gave testimony that contradicted the alibi. He told the court he had been viewing pornography on the family computer that afternoon and would only have done so if he thought the house was empty. Computer records confirmed this. The brother also admitted that he had originally lied to police after agreeing on a story with his mother. Because of this testimony, Luke's mother was later charged with perjury for lying about Luke's whereabouts. That charge was dropped after Luke was convicted because she had already been discredited. The prosecution also presented evidence that Luke had been in a secret relationship with another girl and had planned to go away with her just days after the murder. They argued this could have been a motive for conflict with Jody on the afternoon she died. Luke did not testify in his own defense. His lawyers argued that no forensic evidence directly linked him to the killing, pointing out that the murder weapon was never found and that the DNA from the couple could be explained by their intimate relationship. The defense also argued that Luke had found the body because his dog led him to it, and they arranged for a mock wall to be built in the courthouse to try to demonstrate this possibility. A visit was made to the actual crime scene for the jury. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a majority verdict on January 21, 2005. They found Luke guilty of murder. He was also found guilty of supplying cannabis. Luke showed no emotion when the verdict was read. The judge, Lord Nimmo Smith, postponed sentencing to consider the minimum term Luke would serve. On February 11, 2005, The judge sentenced Luke to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years before he could be considered for parole. The judge told Luke that he could not look into the black depths of his mind and described the murder as truly evil. The judge also noted that Luke's relationship with another girl may have been a trigger for the killing, and that Luke's lack of emotional response may have made him able to inflict such harm. After the trial, Luke's mother was charged with perjury for lying to provide him an alibi. The charge was dropped following Luke's conviction. Luke appealed his conviction and sentence. In 2008, the Court of Criminal Appeal in Edinburgh heard his case. He argued that the trial should have been moved to another city because of press coverage. The appeal judges rejected all 6 grounds of appeal. They said there was sufficient evidence for the conviction. They criticized the way police had questioned Luke on one occasion in 2003, calling it outrageous, but concluded that none of the key prosecution evidence came from that interview. In 2011, Luke appealed his sentence. 2 of the 3 appeal judges refused to reduce the 20-year minimum term. A third judge thought it should be lowered to 15 years, but the majority decision stood. Later that year, Luke tried to use a new human rights ruling from a case called Catter to challenge his conviction, arguing that he should have had a lawyer during police questioning. The court refused his application, stating that his earlier appeal had already been decided before that ruling and could not be reopened. In 2012, a new team of lawyers submitted a 300-page dossier to the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, seeking to have the case reviewed. In 2014, the commission ruled that while police had breached Luke's human rights in one interview, there were no grounds to overturn the conviction. The commission stated that Luke had not suffered a miscarriage of justice. After that decision, Luke's supporters said they would take the case to European courts, but no successful appeal followed. In the years after the trial, Jodi's family continued to express their belief that the correct person had been convicted. They faced abuse and false accusations online from people who supported Luke. Several television documentaries were made about the case. Some of them raised theories about other possible suspects, but police confirmed that all other named individuals had been thoroughly investigated and eliminated from the inquiry. In June 2023, while serving his sentence at HM Prison Greenock, Luke failed 2 random drug tests. As a result, plans to move him to an open prison were stopped. His supporters said this would delay his parole. A relative of Jodi's said the family found it offensive that Luke's supporters used Jodi's name in their campaigns to free him. Luke Mitchell continues to serve his life sentence. All his legal challenges have been rejected, and his conviction remains in place. The family of Jodi Jones has said they remain satisfied that justice was done. Story 3. Bo Bergdahl was born on March 28, 1986, in Sun Valley, Idaho. His parents were Bob and Yanni Bergdahl. He had one older sister. The family lived in Haley, a town near Sun Valley. Bergdahl's mother taught him and his sister at home. They did not go to a regular school. The family went to Sovereign Redeemer Presbyterian Church, which was a small church in their area. When Bergdahl became an adult, he earned a GED certificate through the College of Southern Idaho. Instead of going to college, he spent his time learning different skills. He studied fencing and martial arts. Then he switched to ballet classes at the Sun Valley Ballet School in Ketchum, Idaho. For a period between 2007 and 2008, he lived in a Buddhist monastery. He was searching for something, but he did not talk much about what he was looking for. In 2006, Bergdahl tried to join the United States Coast Guard. He went through basic training, but after 26 days he was discharged. The military called it an uncharacterized discharge, which meant he was let go before finishing basic training. The reason given was psychological. 2 years later, in 2008, Bergdahl enlisted in the United States Army. He went to basic training, and then to infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia. After he finished, he was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 501st Infantry Regiment, 4th Brigade Combat Team, 25th Infantry Division. His unit was based at Fort Richardson, Alaska. People who served with him noticed that Bergdahl kept to himself. One soldier, Specialist Jason Fry, said Bergdahl was a loner, but he was focused and well-behaved. Before the unit deployed to Afghanistan, Bergdahl told Fry something unusual. He said, "If this deployment is lame, I'm just going to walk off into the mountains of Pakistan." At the time, the other soldiers did not know if he was joking. During Thanksgiving, while other soldiers socialized together, Bergdahl stayed alone and studied maps of Afghanistan. He began learning Pashto, the language spoken in parts of Afghanistan. He started spending more time with Afghan people near his base than with his own platoon. His father later told military investigators that Bergdahl was psychologically isolated. In May 2009, Bergdahl's unit deployed to a small outpost called Mest Malik in eastern Afghanistan. The soldiers there conducted patrols and counterinsurgency work. On June 25, 2009, the battalion lost its first soldier in combat. First Lieutenant Brian Bradshaw was killed by a roadside bomb near the village of Yaya Kale, not far from Bergdahl's outpost. Bergdahl's father later said that Bradshaw and Bergdahl had grown close during training, and Bradshaw's death made Bergdahl's mood much darker. 2 days later, on June 27, 2009, Bergdahl sent a long email to his parents. In the email he wrote that he was ashamed to be an American. He said the army was full of liars and bullies. He wrote that the soldiers made fun of Afghan people and did not care about them. He said the system was wrong. He ended by saying he was sorry for everything. His father replied with an email telling him to obey his conscience. That email was the last message Bergdahl sent before the events that would change his life. On the night of June 30th, 2009, Bergdahl was at Observation Post Mest, a small American outpost near the town of Yehya Kale in Paktika Province, Afghanistan. He had finished his shift. Instead of staying with his unit, he walked away from the post. He left his equipment neatly stacked. The only thing he took with him was his compass. Some soldiers in his platoon later said that before he disappeared, he had mailed his computer and other personal belongings back to his parents in the United States. There were stories that he left a note, but that was never proved. After Bergdahl left the outpost, he was captured by members of the Taliban and the Haqqani Network, an insurgent group linked to the Taliban. The exact details of how he was caught were never fully agreed upon. Some reports said he was taken after falling behind on a patrol. Other reports said he was grabbed near the base. What was clear was that he became a prisoner of the enemy. For the next 5 years, Bergdahl was held captive, first in Afghanistan and later in Pakistan. His captors treated him harshly. At one point, he tried to escape. He managed to get away, but after less than 9 days he was caught again. As punishment, his captors locked him in a metal cage and kept him in total darkness for weeks at a time. He was also beaten. The Taliban released several videos of him over the years, using him as a bargaining tool. In those videos he appeared frightened and downcast. The Taliban demanded that the United States release Taliban prisoners from Guantanamo Bay in exchange for Bergdahl's freedom. While Bergdahl was in captivity, the United States Army launched a massive search effort to find him. The Army issued a Dust One status, which meant that finding him became a high priority. Soldiers from Bergdahl's own battalion were sent on missions to look for him in the mountains and villages of eastern Afghanistan. These missions were dangerous. Insurgents attacked the search teams. At least 6 soldiers from Bergdahl's battalion were killed during operations that were directly tied to the effort to find him. One National Guard Master Sergeant, Mark Allen, was shot in the head during a mission to gather information about Bergdahl. The wound left him unable to walk or speak, and he died years later from the effects of that injury. The search for Bergdahl also took resources away from other military tasks. Officers who served in Afghanistan later said that diverting soldiers and equipment to look for Bergdahl delayed plans to close a remote outpost called Combat Outpost Keating. That outpost was later attacked by hundreds of Taliban fighters on October 3, 2009. 8 American soldiers were killed in that battle. While the search went on, Bergdahl remained in captivity. For years, the United States government tried to negotiate his release. The Taliban insisted on swapping him for 5 high-ranking Taliban members held at Guantanamo Bay. The negotiations moved slowly and stopped at times. Then, in the spring of 2014, the two sides reached an agreement. On May 31, 2014, Bergdahl was handed over by 18 Taliban members to a team of United States Special Operations Forces in eastern Afghanistan, near the Pakistani border. The handover was peaceful. At the same time, the 5 Taliban prisoners were transferred from Guantanamo Bay to the custody of the government of Qatar. Bergdahl was flown first to a military base in Afghanistan, then to a hospital in Germany for medical care. Doctors found that he had suffered from torture, including being held in a cage. After several days, he was flown to Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, to continue his recovery. In July 2014, the Army announced that Bergdahl would return to regular duty. He was assigned to a base in San Antonio, where he worked as a clerk. Because the circumstances of his disappearance had created anger among some soldiers, he was given a security detail to protect him from possible attacks by fellow service members. By then, the debate over whether he had deserted or had been a prisoner of war had already begun, but the official investigation into his actions had only just started. On June 16, 2014, about 2 weeks after Bergdahl was released, the United States Army began an official investigation into what had happened. The Army wanted to know why Bergdahl had left his post and how he had been captured. A major general named Kenneth Dahl was put in charge of the investigation. Over the next 2 months, Dahl interviewed 57 witnesses, including Bergdahl himself. Bergdahl told investigators that he had left his post because he wanted to report misconduct in his unit. He said he had planned to walk to another base and then return quickly. He also said he was not trying to desert permanently. In December 2014, the Army finished its investigation and referred the case to a 4-star general to decide whether Bergdahl should face a court-martial, which is a military trial. On March 25, 2015, the Army announced that Bergdahl had been charged with 2 crimes under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The first charge was desertion, with the added detail that he intended to avoid important or hazardous duty. The second charge was misbehavior before the enemy, which meant he had endangered the safety of his unit or his post. The misbehavior charge was the more serious one and could carry a life sentence if he was found guilty. Before the trial, Bergdahl underwent a mental health evaluation. An Army Sanity Board examined him and diagnosed him with schizotypal personality disorder, a mental condition. The board concluded that even though he had a severe mental disease at the time he left his post, he was still able to understand that what he was doing was wrong. That finding meant the case could move forward. In September 2015, a hearing was held at Fort Sam Houston in Texas. This was called an Article 32 hearing, similar to a preliminary hearing in civilian courts. At the hearing, Major General Dahl testified. He said he found no evidence that Bergdahl was sympathetic to the Taliban or had intended to desert permanently. Dahl also said he found no evidence that any soldiers had been killed while directly searching for Bergdahl. Dahl recommended that Bergdahl should not be sent to prison. After the hearing, the presiding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Mark Visker, recommended that Bergdahl face a special court-martial, which is a lower level of court, and that a prison sentence would be inappropriate. The final decision was made by General Robert B. Abrams, who commanded the Army Forces Command at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. In December 2015, General Abrams rejected the recommendations for a lighter proceeding. He ordered that Bergdahl face a general court-martial, the highest level of military court, on both charges. The trial was set to begin in 2017. In 2016, the case received widespread attention when it became the subject of the second season of the podcast serial. During the same year, Bergdahl's lawyers asked President Barack Obama for a pardon, but no pardon was granted. In January 2017, a new issue arose. Donald Trump had become president. During his election campaign, Trump had called Bergdahl a dirty, rotten traitor and made other harsh statements about him. Bergdahl's lawyers filed a motion to dismiss the charges. They argued that the president's comments made it impossible for Bergdahl to receive a fair trial because the comments amounted to unlawful command influence. A military judge, Colonel Jeffrey Nance, heard the motion. In February 2017, Judge Nance declined to dismiss the case. Bergdahl's lawyers appealed, but the Army Court of Criminal Appeals denied the appeal in March 2017. The trial was scheduled for October 2017. Before the trial began, Bergdahl made a decision. On August 21, 2017, he chose to have his case decided by the military judge alone, without a jury. On October 16, 2017, Bergdahl stood before Judge Nance at Fort Bragg and pleaded guilty to both charges, desertion and misbehavior before the enemy. By pleading guilty, he admitted that he had left his post without authority and that his actions had endangered his unit. After the guilty plea, a sentencing hearing began on October 23, 2017. During the hearing, prosecutors presented evidence about the soldiers who had been injured or killed during the search efforts. They also showed that Bergdahl's disappearance had caused the military to divert resources, which may have contributed to the attack on Combat Outpost Keating. Bergdahl's defense team presented evidence about his mental condition, his 5 years of captivity, and the torture he had endured. They argued that he had already suffered greatly, and that prison time was not necessary. On November 3, 2017, Judge Nance announced the sentence. Bergdahl was sentenced to be dishonorably discharged from the Army. His rank was reduced to private, which is the lowest enlisted rank. He was also ordered to pay a fine of $1,000 per month from his pay for 10 months. He was not given any prison time. The fine and the reduction in rank took effect immediately, but the dishonorable discharge was put on hold pending automatic appeals. After the sentencing, President Trump wrote on social media that the decision was a complete and total disgrace to our country and to our military. Under military law, the sentence was reviewed by higher authorities. In June 2018, General Robert B. Abrams, the same general who had ordered the court-martial, approved the sentence. The case then went to the United States Army Court of Criminal Appeals. On August 27, 2020, that court affirmed the sentence, meaning they agreed that the punishment was appropriate. Bergdahl then took his case to the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces, the highest military court, which also upheld the sentence. After the military appeals were exhausted, Bergdahl's lawyers took a new approach. In February 2021, they filed a petition in a federal civilian court, the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. They asked the judge to throw out the conviction entirely. The petition argued that the military judge, Colonel Jeffrey Nance, should have disclosed that he had applied for a job with the Department of Justice while he was presiding over Bergdahl's case. The defense claimed this created an appearance of bias. The Justice Department opposed the petition and tried to have it dismissed. For 2 years, the case moved slowly through the civilian court. In July 2023, Senior Judge Reggie Walton issued a ruling. Judge Walton agreed with Bergdahl's lawyers. He He found that Judge Nance's failure to disclose his job application with the Justice Department could create the appearance of potential bias. Based on that finding, Judge Walton vacated Bergdahl's conviction. That meant the court-martial conviction was erased as if it had never happened. Bergdahl was no longer a convicted deserter under the law. The Justice Department disagreed with Judge Walton's ruling. On May 29, 2024, the government filed an appeal, asking a higher court to reverse the decision and put the conviction back in place. As of the time this account ends, that appeal is pending before the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. As for the soldiers who were hurt or killed during the search for Bergdahl, their families lived with the loss. One of them, Master Sergeant Mark Allen, had been shot in the head during a mission to find Bergdahl in 2009. He remained disabled for years and died on October 12, 2019, from complications of his wound. The 6 other soldiers from Bergdahl's battalion, who were killed during search-related operations, were never brought back. The debate over whether their deaths were directly caused by Bergdahl's actions continued long after the court-martial ended, but no further legal action was taken against Bergdahl on those matters. Bo Bergdahl, who had been held captive for 5 years and then faced 5 more years of legal proceedings, walked away from the military without a conviction on his record. The dishonorable discharge that had been ordered in 2017 was never finalized because the conviction that supported it had been vacated. The case remained unresolved in the courts, leaving a final legal question still open. The story of how Bo Bergdahl left his post, was held captive, faced a court-martial, and ultimately had his conviction erased by a federal judge ended not with a clear resolution, but with the military and the government still arguing over what justice should have looked like. Story 4. Elton Simpson was born in Illinois around 1985. He grew up in a suburb called Westmont, just outside Chicago. His family was not especially religious. When he was young, his parents separated, and later he moved with his mother to Phoenix, Arizona. He was a quiet child. Those who knew him said he kept to himself. He went to Washington High School in Phoenix. It was during his time there that he became interested in Islam. He started reading about the religion and eventually converted. His conversion was serious. He began attending a mosque called the Islamic Community Center of Phoenix. He went there regularly starting around 2005. People at the mosque saw him as a devoted young man. His lawyer later described him as particularly devout. But he was not seen as aggressive or threatening. After high school, Simpson went to Yavapai College in Prescott, Arizona. He played basketball for the college team. He did not finish a degree. Instead, he returned to Phoenix and took a job at a dentist's office. He worked there for several years. In his daily life, he followed Islamic practices strictly. He prayed often and kept to a small circle of friends from the mosque. Around 2006, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, began to watch him. They learned that he had expressed interest in traveling overseas to join fighters in Somalia. Over the next few years, agents used an informant to talk with him. In recorded conversations, Simpson said things like, "It's time to roll to the battlefield." He spoke about being shot or killed as a path to heaven. The FBI collected these statements as evidence. In 2010, federal agents arrested Simpson just one day before he was set to fly to Somalia. They charged him with making false statements about terrorism. The mosque where he prayed posted a bond of $100,000 to get him released from jail while his case moved forward. In August 2011, a federal judge found Simpson guilty of lying to a federal agent about his travel plans. The judge did not find enough evidence to prove he intended to join a terrorist group. Simpson received a sentence of 3 years of probation and a $600 fine. He was also placed on the federal no-fly list, which meant he could not board a commercial airplane. After his conviction, Simpson remained in Phoenix. He continued to work at the dentist's office. He still attended the Islamic Community Center of Phoenix, but months before the spring of 2015, he stopped showing up. By that time, he had also started using social media to follow certain individuals who supported militant groups overseas. He interacted with them through encrypted messages, though he kept this part of his life separate from his job and the people who knew him in person. He lived in an apartment with a roommate. The roommate's name was Nadir Sufi. They shared the rent and spent time together outside of work. Simpson's probation ended in 2014. After that, he began to talk more openly with his roommate about ideas that went beyond their everyday lives. Elton Simpson and his roommate Nadir Sufi began making concrete plans in early 2015. They were joined by a third man named Abdul Malik Abdul Karim, who lived in the Phoenix area. Abdul Karim was older than both of them. He had a criminal record that went back to the 1990s, including charges for assault and drunk driving. In 2013, he had converted to Islam and changed his name. He sometimes cleaned carpets at the same mosque where Simpson had prayed. The three men started meeting together. They practiced shooting at locations outside Phoenix. They talked about carrying out an attack in the United States. At first, they discussed different targets. They considered attacking a Super Bowl event in Glendale, Arizona. But then Simpson learned about an event in Garland, Texas. The event was called the First Annual Muhammad Art Exhibit and Contest. It was organized by a group that had drawn criticism for showing cartoons of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. The event was scheduled for May 3, 2015, at a place called the Curtis Culwell Center. Simpson focused on this event. He began posting about it on social media under a name that was not his real one. In one message, he wrote that the brothers from the Charlie Hebdo attack in France had done their part, and now it was time for brothers in the United States to do theirs. A person overseas who supported the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, encouraged him. Simpson also followed an online account that posted a map of the Curtis Culwell Center and urged people to attack the event with weapons, bombs, or knives. Abdul Karim supplied firearms and ammunition. He bought rifles and handguns. He also bought body armor. The firearms were purchased legally through stores in Arizona. Over several months, Simpson and Sufi stored the weapons in their apartment. They gathered about 1,500 rounds of ammunition. The attack was planned for the evening of May 3, 2015. Simpson and Sufi prepared by putting on tactical vests. They loaded 3 rifles and 3 handguns into a car. That morning, Simpson used his social media account to retweet a message that had been posted by the account that was urging attacks. He then sent his own message with the hashtag #TexasAttack. In it, he wrote a prayer asking Allah to accept them as fighters. He also said he had pledged allegiance to the leader of ISIL and told his followers to follow another account that belonged to a known ISIL supporter. Around the same time, the FBI had notified the Garland Police Department that Simpson was interested in the event and might show up. The FBI did not say they believed an attack was certain. They shared the information as a warning. Some officers at the event later said they were not aware of the warning before the shooting started. The event itself began in the afternoon. About 150 people attended inside the Curtis Culwell Center. The organizers had hired 40 off-duty police officers and private security guards. In addition, a SWAT team, FBI agents, and other law enforcement were positioned nearby because officials expected possible protests. Shortly before 7 o'clock in the evening, Simpson and Sufi drove toward the center. They approached a barricade that had been set up in front of the building. A marked police car was parked at the barricade. Inside the police car sat a Garland police officer named Gregory Stevens and an unarmed Garland Independent School District security guard named Bruce Joyner. Simpson stopped the car. He and Sufi got out. Both were wearing body armor. They began firing rifles at the police car. Dozens of rounds struck the vehicle. One bullet hit Bruce Joyner in the ankle. Officer Stevens was not hit. He returned fire from inside the car, shooting through the windshield. He struck both attackers. Simpson and Sufi went down but were still alive. SWAT officers arrived within minutes and killed them. No one inside the event center was hurt. Attendees were kept inside until officers determined the scene was safe. The injured security guard, Bruce Joyner, was taken to a local hospital. He was treated for the gunshot wound and released later that night. After the shooting, police discovered that Simpson and Sufi had a large amount of ammunition in their car. Bomb squads were brought in because officers worried there might be explosives, but none were found. Simpson's social media account was quickly traced to him. Investigators found that he had been in communication with a person named Junaid Hussain, a British hacker who had joined ISIL in Syria. Hussain had encouraged Simpson to act. Simpson had also interacted with other extremists online. A few hours after the attack, ISIL made a public statement on its radio station claiming responsibility. The statement said 2 soldiers of the Caliphate had attacked the art exhibit. This was the first time ISIL claimed an attack on United States soil. Later, government officials would say the attack appeared to have been inspired by ISIL rather than directed by them. Back in Phoenix, police searched the apartment Simpson and Sufi shared. They found more ammunition and evidence that the 2 men had been preparing for the attack for months. Abdul Karim was not at the scene. He had stayed behind in Phoenix. In the minutes after the shooting, federal investigators already had more information than the public knew. The FBI had been monitoring Elton Simpson for years, and on the day of the attack, an undercover agent was positioned near the Curtis Culwell Center. The agent was in a vehicle directly behind Simpson and Sufi when they got out and started firing. When the shooting began, the undercover agent tried to drive away, but was stopped at gunpoint by Garland police officers who did not recognize him. The agent was detained briefly until his status was confirmed. This fact would later become important in a legal case. Within hours, investigators identified Simpson as the man who had posted the hashtag Texas Attack messages. They traced his online communications and confirmed that he had been in contact with Junaid Hussain, a British ISIL propagandist living in Syria. Hussain had encouraged Simpson to carry out an attack. However, officials concluded that Simpson had chosen the target and planned the attack himself. The attack was described as inspired but not directed by ISIL. The investigation then turned to the 3rd man in Phoenix. Abdul Malik Abdul Karim had helped Simpson and Sufi practice shooting and had supplied many of the firearms. After the attack, Karim lied to FBI agents. He told them he had not been involved in planning, but investigators had already gathered evidence. A confidential informant told agents that Karim had been angry when the informant refused to sell him bulletproof vests and gun silencers. Karim had also tried to get money for the attack by falsely claiming he had been hit by a car and filing an insurance claim. On June 11, 2015, about 5 weeks after the shooting, federal agents arrested Abdul Karim in Phoenix. He was charged with conspiracy, making false statements, and illegally transporting firearms across state lines with intent to commit a felony. Later that year, additional charges were added: conspiring to provide material support to ISIL and attempting to attack the Super Bowl game in Glendale, Arizona, which had been an earlier target. Karim's trial took place in March 2016. Prosecutors presented evidence that he had practiced shooting with Simpson and Sufi, helped supply weapons, and knew about the Garland attack beforehand. On March 17, 2016, the jury found him guilty. In February 2017, a federal judge sentenced Abdul Karim to 30 years in federal prison. He was sent to a medium-security prison in Texas, with a scheduled release date in 2041. While Kareem's case moved through the courts, a different investigation was unfolding in Florida. A man named Joshua Ryan Goldberg, who was 20 years old, had been running an online persona that called for attacks on the Curtis Culwell Center. Goldberg's fake account had posted a map of the center and urged followers to attack with weapons, bombs, or knives. Simpson had retweeted a message from that account on the morning of the attack. After the shooting, Goldberg claimed responsibility for inspiring the attack in conversations with multiple news outlets. He was not connected to Simpson in person, but his online activities had drawn the attention of the FBI. In December 2017, Goldberg pleaded guilty to federal charges related to planning a separate bombing in Kansas City. As part of his plea, he admitted to inciting the Garland attack through his online posts. The security guard who was shot, Bruce Joyner, filed a federal lawsuit in October 2017. He sued the FBI and the Department of Justice. His lawsuit claimed that the FBI was partly responsible for his injuries because agents had known about Simpson's plans and had an undercover agent at the scene, but did not stop the attack. The government argued that it had sovereign immunity, meaning it could not be sued without its consent. On December 21, 2018, a federal district court judge dismissed the lawsuit on those grounds. In the years after the attack, the role of Junaid Hussain also came to an end. In August 2015, a United States drone strike in Syria killed him. Officials had considered him a high-value target because of his efforts to encourage attacks in Western countries. No other individuals were charged in connection with the Garland attack. The event organizers continued to hold similar exhibits in later years, though none were attacked again. The Curtis Culwell Center remained open under the management of the Garland Independent School District. Elton Simpson and Nadir Sufi died at the scene on May 3, 2015. Their bodies were returned to their families. Simpson's family held a private funeral. Sufi's mother, who lived in Utah, told reporters that she believed her son had been led astray by Simpson, but she did not blame the police for what happened. Both attackers were buried without public ceremony. The investigation, the arrests, and the trials together closed every legal avenue connected to the failed attack. The last court case related to the event ended with the dismissal of the security guard's lawsuit in 2018, leaving no further proceedings pending. Story 5. James Egan Holmes was born on December 13, 1987, in San Diego, California. His father, Robert, was a mathematician and scientist who had studied at top universities. His mother, Arlene, worked as a registered nurse. James had one younger sister. The family had deep roots in the country. Some of his ancestors had come to America on the Mayflower. When James was young, the family lived in Oak Hills, a community in Monterey County near Castroville, California. He went to elementary school there. When he was 12 years old, the family moved back to San Diego. They settled in a well-off neighborhood called Rancho Penasquitos. Around this time, people who knew him later said he started to become less social. He attended Westview High School in San Diego. While in high school, he played soccer and ran cross-country. He also went to church with his family at a Lutheran church in the area. During his middle school years, according to what his lawyer later shared, James began to experience mental health struggles. At age 11, he tried to harm himself in a suicide attempt. As a child, he told people he was frightened of something he called nail ghosts that he believed hammered on the walls at night. Despite these difficulties, James graduated from high school in 2006. After graduation, he went to the University of California, Riverside. He studied neuroscience and did well. In the summer of 2008, he worked as a counselor at a residential summer camp for children ages 7 to 14. He was responsible for 10 children, and had no disciplinary problems there. In 2010, he completed his bachelor's degree with highest honors. He was in the top 1% of his class and was part of several honor societies. During his college years, he also held a job at a factory that coated pills and capsules in San Diego County. A coworker later said James was unsociable and once acted strangely at his workstation, staring at a blank wall and not responding when spoken to. He only glanced and smirked before turning away. After graduating, James decided to continue his education. In June 2011, he moved to Aurora, Colorado, to start a PhD program in neuroscience at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. He received a grant from the National Institutes of Health and a stipend from the university to support his studies. Before choosing Colorado, he had also been accepted to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign with a similar financial offer. The reviewers there remembered his application partly because he had included a picture of himself with a llama. He declined that offer without giving a specific reason. In Aurora, James rented a one-bedroom apartment on Paris Street in a building where many other health studies students lived. On his rental application, he described himself as quiet and easygoing. He also created online profiles, including a dating profile where he listed himself as agnostic, and he used a university email address and a social media account. In the fall of 2011, he began dating a fellow student in his biology class. The relationship had ups and downs. She later said James often made deadpan jokes that made other people feel uncomfortable, and at one point he expressed a desire to kill people, though she did not take the statement seriously at the time. Their relationship ended around February 2012. Later, James told a psychiatrist that the breakup contributed to his depression. In graduate school, James started seeing shadows and flickers at the corners of his eyes. He described these images to mental health professionals as figures that fought each other with guns and other weapons. His academic performance also began to decline. In early June 2012, he failed a key oral exam. Just hours after that exam, he took a step that would change the course of his life, though he did not yet know it. Just hours after failing his oral exam in early June 2012, James Holmes went to a store in Denver and bought a Smith & Wesson M&P15 sport rifle. This was his third firearm purchase. Earlier, on May 22nd, he had bought a Glock 22 pistol at a shop in Aurora. 6 days after that, on May 28th, he bought a Remington 870 Express tactical shotgun at a store in Denver. All three guns were bought legally, and background checks were completed each time. In the 4 months before the shooting, he also bought ammunition over the internet. He purchased 3,000 rounds for the pistol, 3,000 rounds for the rifle, and 350 shells for the shotgun. On July 2nd, he ordered a tactical vest, 2 magazine holders, and a knife from an online retailer. He also bought spike strips, which he later admitted he planned to use in case police chased him by car. On June 25th, less than a month before the shooting, he emailed an application to join a gun club in Byers, Colorado. The owner called him several times to invite him to a mandatory orientation, but could only reach his answering machine. Holmes left one voicemail in reply. The owner later described the voicemail as bizarre, with a deep, rambling voice that sounded like someone trying to be as strange as possible. The owner told his staff to let him know if Holmes showed up, but Holmes never appeared at the gun range and never called back. Holmes had been seeing a psychiatrist at the university's student health clinic. In the weeks leading up to the shooting, the psychiatrist became worried about him. She had spoken with his mother, who said he had long-standing social problems. Holmes had expressed thoughts about killing people. In June, after he sent a threatening email, the psychiatrist activated a threat assessment team to figure out how to handle him. She believed he may have had a personality disorder and was concerned about his fantasies of killing as many people as possible. However, no one stopped him or placed him under a mental health hold. On July 19th, just hours before the shooting, Holmes mailed a notebook to his psychiatrist. The notebook contained his detailed thoughts and plans from the weeks before. The package was sent through the university mail system and would later be found undelivered in the mailroom. That same day, he reportedly called a crisis hotline for mental health. According to later accounts, he hoped someone would talk him out of what he was planning. The call lasted only 9 seconds and was disconnected. Holmes had chosen his target carefully. He later told a psychiatrist that he selected the Century 16 movie theater in Aurora because it was near his home, because the doors could be locked to trap people inside, and because the area had a slower police response time. He chose a midnight screening of a new movie, believing fewer children would be present. He had considered other locations, such as an airport, but decided against them because of too much security. He also thought about using explosives or chemical agents, but worried he might blow himself up. He considered serial killing, but decided it was too personal and would leave too much evidence. On the night of July 20th, 2012, Holmes went to the Century 16 theater at the town center at Aurora. He bought a ticket for the midnight screening. He entered the theater and sat in the audience for a short time. At some point, he slipped out through an exit door and propped it open from the outside so he could re-enter later. He went to his car, which was parked behind the theater. He put on tactical gear, including a vest, a helmet, and a gas mask. He gathered his weapons, the rifle, the shotgun, and the pistol. He carried them back to the propped open door and entered the theater while the movie was playing. Once inside, he set off canisters that released gas or smoke. He then began firing into the audience. He used the rifle first, then the shotgun, then the pistol when the other weapons jammed. The shooting continued for several minutes. In total, he killed 12 people and wounded 70 others. Some were injured directly by gunfire. Others were hurt while fleeing or from the gas. When police arrived at the theater, they found Holmes standing next to his car in the parking lot behind the building. He was still wearing his tactical gear. He did not resist. Officers arrested him on the spot. While being placed in the back of a police car, he became interested in watching the aftermath of the shooting. Immediately after his arrest, Holmes told the police that his apartment was booby-trapped with explosives. Officers had not yet searched his home. When they went to his apartment on Paris Street, they found that he had set up complex explosive devices with trip wires and incendiary materials. A bomb squad worked for more than a day to safely disarm them. Holmes was taken to the Arapahoe County Jail. Because of the seriousness of the charges and the attention the case brought, he was held in solitary confinement, and guards placed him under suicide watch. When police arrested James Holmes behind the theater, they immediately began collecting evidence. Officers recovered 3 firearms from inside the theater and from his car. They also found the tactical gear he had worn. Investigators spoke with dozens of witnesses who were inside the theater, including those who were injured and those who escaped. The scene was processed over many hours, with investigators marking shell casings, documenting the locations of victims, and photographing the entire theater. Because Holmes had told officers about the explosives in his apartment, the police did not enter his home immediately. They called a bomb squad. When the squad entered the apartment on Paris Street, they found a complex setup of improvised explosive devices connected by trip wires. The apartment had jars filled with accelerants, ammunition, and other materials meant to cause an explosion and fire. The bomb squad worked carefully to disarm each device. The process took more than a day to complete safely. Investigators later searched the apartment and seized computers, prescription bottles, and other personal items. The notebook that Holmes had mailed to his psychiatrist on July 19th was discovered in the university mailroom before it was delivered. It had not reached the psychiatrist. Investigators obtained the notebook and found that it contained detailed writings about his plans, his thoughts, and his reasoning in the weeks leading up to the shooting. The notebook became a key piece of evidence. Holmes remained in jail without bail. In the months after his arrest, he made several attempts to harm himself while in custody. Jail staff placed him on suicide watch and later moved him to a mental health facility for evaluation. On July 30th, 2012, prosecutors filed formal charges. Holmes was charged with 24 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts for each person killed, 1 for murder with deliberation, and 1 for murder with extreme indifference, along with 116 counts of attempted murder and additional charges for the explosives. The number of charges was later adjusted, eventually reaching 165 counts. In the months that followed, Holmes's defense attorneys stated that their client was mentally ill. The court proceedings were delayed several times as lawyers argued about evidence, mental evaluations, and other legal matters. In March 2013, Holmes's attorneys offered to have him plead guilty in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. Prosecutors rejected the offer. On April 1, 2013, prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. On May 31, 2013, Holmes changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. The judge accepted the plea. Holmes was then sent to the Colorado Mental Health Institute for evaluation. Court-appointed psychiatrists examined him to determine whether he was legally insane at the time of the shooting. The trial was delayed multiple times due to the complexity of the case and the mental health evaluations. Jury selection began in January 2015 and lasted 3 months. More than 9,000 people were summoned, making it the largest jury summons in United States history. A final panel of 24 people was selected, 12 jurors and 12 alternates. The trial itself began on April 27, 2015. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence that Holmes had planned the attack for months. They showed how he bought guns, ammunition, and tactical gear. They called survivors to testify about the shooting and its effects on their lives. The notebook was entered into evidence, and prosecutors argued that it showed premeditation. The defense admitted that Holmes was the shooter, but argued that he was suffering from severe mental illness and could not control his actions. Court-appointed psychiatrists testified that Holmes was mentally ill but legally sane. One psychiatrist diagnosed him with schizotypal personality disorder and said Holmes knew what he was doing and knew it was wrong. Another psychiatrist diagnosed him with schizoaffective disorder, but also concluded that Holmes was legally sane at the time of the shooting. The defense called their own mental health experts who gave opposing opinions. During the trial, several jurors were dismissed for various reasons, including discussing the case outside court or having personal connections to victims. The trial continued with the remaining jurors. On July 16, 2015, after deliberating for 12 hours, the jury returned a verdict. They found Holmes guilty on all 24 counts of first-degree murder, all 140 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and the explosives charge. He was also found guilty of the sentence enhancement for committing a crime of violence. The trial then moved to the penalty phase, where the same jury would decide whether Holmes would receive the death penalty or life in prison without parole. The prosecution presented aggravating factors, arguing that Holmes acted with cruelty and ambushed his victims. The defense presented mitigating factors, including his mental illness and testimony from his family. His father pleaded for his life, showing photographs of family vacations and describing how Holmes had become withdrawn as a teenager. On August 7, 2015, the jury announced that they could not reach a unanimous decision on the death penalty. One juror was opposed to execution because of Holmes's mental health issues, and 2 other jurors were uncertain. Under Colorado law, The failure to reach a unanimous verdict meant the death penalty was off the table. On August 26, 2015, Judge Carlos Samar formally sentenced James Holmes to 12 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the murder convictions. He added an additional 3,318 years for the attempted murder and explosives charges. At the sentencing, the judge said it was the court's intention that Holmes never be released into free society again, and that he deserved no sympathy. Later in 2015, Judge Samar ordered Holmes to pay $955,000 in restitution to the victims and to the State Victim Compensation Fund. After sentencing, Holmes was moved to the Colorado State Penitentiary. In October 2015, he was assaulted by another inmate. Following that incident, he was transferred out of state. He was eventually placed in a federal prison in Pennsylvania, where he remains in custody. The 12 people killed in the theater ranged in age from 6 to 52 years old. The 70 injured survivors endured physical and emotional wounds that lasted long after the trial ended. For the families and the community of Aurora, the conclusion of the legal case closed a chapter, but the losses remained. James Egan Holmes was convicted of murdering 12 people and attempting to murder 70 others, and he will spend the rest of his life in prison without any possibility of release. Story 6. Rakhmat Akalov was born on February 14, 1978. He came from a family that lived in a village outside the city of Samarkand, which at that time was part of the Soviet Union. His older brother was named Olim. The family thought of themselves as a typical Soviet family. When the Soviet Union collapsed, they did not welcome that change. In his early years, Rakhmat did not show strong religious beliefs. According to his brother, neither Rakhmat nor his children were ever religious. He did not go to a mosque in Russia or in Uzbekistan, and he did not show signs that he was becoming more religious over time. Rakhmat stayed in his home country until he was an adult. In 2009, he moved to Russia. The reason was work. His older brother Olim was already working at a cement factory outside Moscow. Rakhmat joined him there and worked at the same factory. He kept that job for about 4 years. In 2013, Rakhmat lost his job at the cement factory. After that, he began to plan a move to Europe. He went to Tashkent, which is the capital of Uzbekistan, and there he applied for a visa to Poland. The visa was granted. He traveled first to Warsaw, then to Gdansk, a city in northern Poland. From Gdansk, he took a ferry across the Baltic Sea. His destination was Sweden. Rakhmat arrived in Sweden on October 10, 2014. When he arrived, he made an application for asylum. He did this at the Swedish Migration Agency. On his application, he used a fake name, even though his real identity was already known to the authorities. Under European Union rules called the Dublin Regulation, his asylum application should have been handled by Poland because he already had a visa there. That step was not taken at the time, and his case was processed in Sweden instead. In his asylum application, Rakhmat said he needed protection. He claimed that the security services in Uzbekistan had tortured him and had accused him of terrorism and treason. The Swedish Migration Board looked into these claims. They found no evidence to support what he said. As a result, in late 2016 they decided that he did not have the right to stay in Sweden. He was ordered to leave the country within 4 weeks. Rakhmat did not leave voluntarily. When the migration agency called him to come in, he did not appear. The case was then referred to the police so that they could carry out the deportation. Instead of cooperating, Rakhmat went into hiding. He moved between different addresses in the suburbs of Stockholm. During this time, he was known to people around him as a hard worker. He was described as a normal Muslim who would go to the mosque on Fridays. At the same time, he drank alcohol on weekends and used cannabis. Shortly before the deportation order, Rakhmat lost his construction job. The reason given was that he had used drugs and had been found sleeping while at work. He had been working on construction sites that contained asbestos, which made his behavior especially dangerous in that workplace. After he lost his job and after the deportation order was issued, he remained in hiding in the Stockholm area. Rakhmat Akalov spent time preparing for what he planned to do. The day before the attack, on April 6, 2017, he recorded a video of himself. In that video, he swore allegiance to the Islamic State group. He later made several films in the Odenplan area of Stockholm. In those films, he could be heard saying that it was time to kill what he called infidels. He also said he was grieving over how Muslims in the Levant and Afghanistan were dying. He chose the afternoon of April 7, 2017 to carry out his plan. He selected that time because he knew there would be many tourists in the area. More people would be on the streets, and that was what he wanted. The attack began at around 2:53 in the afternoon. At that time, a truck belonging to the Spendrups brewery was making a delivery on a street called Adolf Fredrikskirkagata in central Stockholm. The driver was delivering goods. Akalov approached the truck and hijacked it. The truck driver tried to stop the hijacking. He stood in front of the truck to block it. Akalov accelerated the truck toward him. The driver had to jump out of the way to avoid being hit. He suffered minor injuries from that action, but he survived. Now in control of the truck, Akalov drove it onto a pedestrian street called Drottninggatan. This was one of Stockholm's main shopping streets. People were walking there, shopping, and going about their day. Akalov drove at high speed down the street for about 500 meters. He did not drive in a straight line. Witnesses later said he zigzagged and appeared to try to target children who were in the area. As the truck moved down the street, it hit pedestrians along the way. People were struck by the vehicle. Some were thrown aside. Others were run over. The attack ended when the truck crashed into the Elaine City department store. This was located at the corner of Drottninggatan and Master Samuelsgatan. The truck slammed into the front of the building. After the impact, the truck caught fire. Firefighters arrived quickly and put out the flames. Akalov got out of the truck and ran away from the scene. He left the area on foot. Inside the truck, after Akalov fled, authorities found a homemade bomb. The device was in a bag. It had not gone off. Police sources later reported that the attacker had been burned by the device while handling it, which left minor injuries on him. The results of the attack were severe. 5 people lost their lives. 4 of them died at the scene or in the hospital very soon after. One of the victims was Chris Bevington, a 41-year-old British citizen who worked for Spotify. Another was a 31-year-old Belgian psychologist. A third was a 69-year-old Swedish woman. The fourth was an 11-year-old Swedish girl named Ebba Akerlund. The fifth victim, a 69-year-old Swedish politician named Marie Kide, who belonged to the Green Party, died in the hospital 3 weeks later from her injuries. In addition to the 5 killed, 14 other people were seriously injured. They were taken to hospitals across Stockholm. The Stockholm County Council reported that 15 people in total were being treated in hospitals on the day of the attack, with 9 of those listed as having serious injuries. Within minutes after the truck crashed into the department store, police in Stockholm received numerous calls. The city was placed under immediate lockdown. The metro system was closed, Stockholm Central Station was evacuated, and all trains in and out of the city were stopped. Police from across Stockholm were called in to help secure the area. As officers secured the scene, they began looking for the man who had fled the truck. Police published pictures of a man wearing a hooded jacket. They asked the public for help identifying him and said they wanted to question him about the attack. About 5 hours after the attack, at around 7:55 in the evening, police officers were in Marsta, a town north of Stockholm. There they found a man who matched the description. He was behaving in a way that drew attention and had minor injuries on his body. The officers detained him. This man was Rakhmat Akalov. Police believed he was the one who had driven the truck. Later that night, the suspect was formally arrested. The arrest took place at 1:15 in the morning on April 8th. The prosecutor placed him on suspicion of terrorist crimes through murder. On April 11th, the Swedish prosecution authority formally identified him as the perpetrator. Once Akalov was in custody, the Swedish Security Service took a leading role in the investigation. They revealed that in 2016 they had received some information about him, but when they tried to follow up, they could not confirm it. At that time, they had considered him a marginal figure on the edges of extremist groups. Police conducted hundreds of interrogations. By April 13th, they had carried out about 700 interviews and made roughly 300 seizures of evidence. Investigators also looked into other people who might have been connected to Akalov. The day after the attack, 5 people were detained during raids on a car and an apartment linked to him. All 5 were released within 2 days. Another suspect was arrested on a lower level of suspicion, but was released 2 days later when the evidence weakened. A third person was arrested on April 23rd and cleared of any involvement 2 days after that. No one else was ever charged in connection with the attack. On April 10th, the public prosecutor requested that Akalov be held in custody while the investigation continued. During the legal proceedings, Akalov asked for a Sunni Muslim defense attorney. The Stockholm District Court rejected that request. At a pre-trial hearing on April 11th, his lawyer told the court that Akalov confessed to committing a terrorist crime and intended to plead guilty. The court ordered a psychological evaluation to determine Akalov's mental state at the time of the attack. The evaluation concluded that he did not suffer from any mental disorder that would affect his criminal responsibility. On January 30th, 2018, Prosecutor Hans Ehrman formally indicted Akalov for terrorist crimes. The trial took place in the following months. On June 7, 2018, the Stockholm District Court delivered its verdict. Akalov was found guilty of terrorist crimes for the 5 murders. He was also found guilty of attempted terrorist crimes for 119 counts of attempted murder and for 24 counts of endangering others. The court sentenced him to life in prison. Under Swedish law, a person serving a life sentence may request to have the sentence converted to a fixed term after serving a certain number of years. The court ruled that Akalov would be eligible to make such a request in 2028. If he is ever released from prison, he will be deported to Uzbekistan and permanently banned from returning to Sweden. After the conviction, Akalov was held in Kumla prison, a high-security facility. In August 2018, another inmate attacked him inside the prison. The assault was carried out by a prisoner who said he wanted revenge for the Stockholm attack. For the victims and their families, the attack left lasting loss. The 5 people who died were mourned across Sweden. In the years that followed, memorials were held, and the city placed a wreath on the anniversary of the attack. The 11-year-old victim, Ebba Akerlund, was later mentioned in a manifesto written by the man who carried out the Christchurch mosque shootings in 2019, though her parents publicly condemned that act and rejected the use of her death to justify further violence. The case against Rakhmat Akalov concluded with his imprisonment, and he remained behind bars as the final step in the legal process. Story 7. Christopher J. Scarver Sr. was born on July 6, 1969, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was the second of 5 children. His family lived in the city, and he grew up there like many other children in the neighborhood. He attended James Madison High School in Milwaukee. He went to classes there until the 11th grade. At that point, he stopped going and dropped out of school. He did not finish his final year. At home, his mother began to see changes in him. He started using alcohol and marijuana, and he became addicted to them. Because of this, his mother told him he could no longer live in her house. She forced him to leave. After leaving home, Scarver found work through a job program. The program was called the Wisconsin Conservation Corps. It was designed to teach young people job skills. Scarver was hired as a trainee carpenter. He learned how to work with wood and tools. His supervisor in the program was a man named Edward Patz. Scarver later said that Patz made him a promise. Patz told him that if he completed the training program, he would be given a full-time job. Scarver believed this and worked toward finishing the training. But before Scarver could complete the program, Edward Patz was dismissed from his job. He was no longer working there. After Patz left, Scarver was not given a full-time job. The promise was not kept, and Scarver was left without the steady work he had expected. Without a job and without a clear path forward, Scarver began to drink alcohol heavily. His drinking was not occasional. He drank large amounts, and his behavior started to change. He later said that when he was drunk, he began to hear voices. The voices told him that he was special. They called him the chosen one. His mental state continued to shift. Eventually, doctors examined him and gave him a diagnosis. They said he had schizophrenia. They also noted that he suffered from messianic delusions, which means he believed he had been given a divine purpose or mission. By this point in his life, Scarver was a young man with no high school diploma, a history of addiction, a lost job opportunity, and a serious mental illness that was affecting how he understood the world. These factors together set the conditions for what would come next. On June 1, 1990, Scarver went to the Wisconsin Conservation Corps training office. He was carrying a .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol. When he arrived, 2 men were inside, the site manager, John Fayen, and a 27-year-old employee named Steve Lohman. Scarver pointed the gun at Steve Lohman and forced him down. He then demanded money from John Fayen. Fayen gave him what he had on hand, only $15. Scarver became angry. He believed he deserved more. He turned the gun on Lohman and shot him 4 times in the head. Lohman fell and died at the scene. Scarver then looked at Fayen and said, "Now do you think I'm kidding? I need more money." After saying this, he shot Lohman 2 more times, even though Lohman was already dead. Fayen was terrified. He wrote a check for $3,000 and handed it to Scarver. Fayen then ran outside to his car. As Fayen fled, Scarver fired the gun at him but missed. Scarver left the office with the cash and the check. Later, Scarver became an inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. That prison held men who had been convicted of serious crimes. On the morning of November 28, 1994, Scarver was assigned to a work detail in the prison gymnasium. 2 other inmates were assigned to the same detail. One was Jesse Anderson, a man convicted of murdering his wife. The other was Jeffrey Dahmer, a serial killer who had been convicted of multiple murders. The corrections officers who were supervising the work detail left the gymnasium. For a period of time, the 3 inmates were left alone with no officers present. Scarver left the area where they were working and walked to the weight room inside the gym. He picked up a metal bar that was used for lifting weights. He returned with the bar and struck Jeffrey Dahmer with it repeatedly, beating him with enough force to cause severe head injuries. After attacking Dahmer, Scarver went to the shower area where Jesse Anderson was. He used a wooden stick, different from the metal bar, to beat Anderson. The blows were delivered with the same intent to cause grave harm. When Scarver finished, he walked back to his cell. He found a corrections officer and said, "God told me to do it. Jesse Anderson and Jeffrey Dahmer are dead." Both men were found badly injured. Dahmer was taken to a hospital, but was declared dead about 1 hour after arriving. Anderson was also taken to a hospital. He remained alive for 2 days, but doctors eventually removed him from life support, and he died from his injuries. After Scarver told the corrections officer what he had done, prison staff immediately went to the gymnasium. They found Jeffrey Dahmer and Jesse Anderson on the floor with severe injuries. Both men were given emergency medical care inside the prison, and then taken by ambulance to a hospital. Dahmer was pronounced dead 1 hour after arrival. Anderson remained on life support for 2 days before doctors removed it, and he died. Prison officials secured the scene and collected the metal bar and the wooden stick that Scarver had used. The prison administration began an internal investigation. Because the 2 deaths occurred inside a state prison, the Columbia County Sheriff's Office and the Wisconsin Department of Justice also opened formal inquiries. Investigators interviewed the corrections officers who had been assigned to supervise the work detail. Those officers stated that they had left the 3 inmates unsupervised for a period of time. The investigation confirmed that Scarver had acted alone and that no other inmates were involved. Scarver was placed in a segregated housing unit while the investigation continued. Psychiatrists and psychologists were brought in to evaluate his mental state. The doctors assessed him to determine whether he understood the charges against him and could assist in his own defense. They found him competent to stand trial. This meant that despite his history of schizophrenia and delusions, he was legally fit to face the court. Prosecutors charged Scarver with 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide for the deaths of Dahmer and Anderson. At the beginning of the legal proceedings, Scarver entered a plea of not guilty. However, before the case went to trial, he changed his plea to no contest. A no contest plea means he did not admit guilt, but accepted that the state had enough evidence to convict him. In exchange for this plea, the state agreed to recommend that he be transferred to a federal prison rather than remain in the Wisconsin prison system. The court accepted the plea and found Scarver guilty of both murders. The judge sentenced him to 2 additional life sentences, to be served consecutively to the life sentence he was already serving for the 1990 murder of Steve Lohman. With these sentences, Scarver was ordered to spend the rest of his life in prison with no possibility of parole. After the sentencing in 1995, Scarver was transferred out of the Wisconsin prison system. He was placed into the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Prison officials in Wisconsin stated that they did not have a facility secure enough to house him. He was first sent to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, for further psychiatric evaluation. From there, he was moved to the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, a federal supermax prison designed for the most dangerous inmates. He remained there until 2000. In 2000, a new state prison opened in Wisconsin called the Wisconsin Secure Program Facility. Scarver was transferred back to Wisconsin and held there. The following year, a federal judge ordered that Scarver and several other inmates with serious mental illnesses be moved from that facility. Scarver was then transferred again to the Centennial Correctional Facility in Colorado, where he continued to serve his sentences. In 2005, Scarver filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. He claimed that prison officials at the Wisconsin Secure Program Facility had subjected him to cruel and unusual punishment. A district court judge dismissed the lawsuit against several of the named officials and ruled that the actions of the remaining officials were not unlawful. Scarver appealed the decision in 2006, but the appeal was unsuccessful. Years later, in 2012, a representative acting for Scarver announced that Scarver was willing to write a book about the murder of Jeffrey Dahmer. No book was published from that announcement, and Scarver remained in prison. The 2 victims' families were left to grieve. Barbara Anderson, Jesse Anderson's mother, expressed her pain publicly after her son's death. The family of Jeffrey Dahmer, who had already endured the notoriety of his serial killings, faced the additional loss caused by the prison beating. Both deaths were ruled homicides, and the official records closed with Scarver's convictions. Scarver spent the following decades in prison, moving between facilities, serving his 3 life sentences. The crimes he committed: first the workplace shooting in 1990, then the 2 prison killings in 1994, ended the lives of 3 men and resulted in Scarver's permanent removal from society. Story 8. Eric David Harris was born on April 9, 1981, in Wichita, Kansas. His father was a pilot in the United States Air Force. Because of his father's job, the Harris family moved often. They lived in different places, including Plattsburgh, New York. In July 1993, they moved to Littleton, Colorado, when Eric's father retired from the military. Eric had an older brother who later went to college at the University of Colorado Boulder. Dylan Bennett Klebold was born on September 11, 1981, in Lakewood, Colorado. His parents were pacifists. The family attended a Lutheran church, and both Dylan and his older brother went through confirmation classes. Dylan was named after the poet Dylan Thomas. Dylan started school at Normandy Elementary for 1st and 2nd grade. Then he transferred to Governor's Ranch Elementary. He was placed in a program for students with high intellectual potential called CHIPS. Eric attended Ken Carroll Middle School. It was there that Eric met Dylan. They became close friends. In 1996, when Eric was 15, he created a website on America Online. At first he used the site to share video game levels he had made for games like Doom and Quake. Later he began writing a blog on that site. In the blog he wrote about small acts of mischief and vandalism. He called these acts rebel missions and wrote mission logs about them. He did some of these activities with Dylan. By early 1997, the tone of Eric's blog posts began to show anger toward society. Later that year, he added instructions on how to make pipe bombs and other explosives. In August 1997, Eric wrote on the blog that he wanted to kill and injure many people, and he named a classmate named Brooks Brown. Brooks Brown's parents saw the website and contacted the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office on August 7, 1997. An investigator wrote a draft request to search the Harris home, but that request was never given to a judge, and no search was done. On January 30, 1998, Eric and Dylan were arrested for breaking into a parked van near Littleton. They stole tools and computer equipment from the van. A judge placed them in a juvenile diversion program for 12 months. As part of that program, they had to attend classes like anger management and meet regularly with diversion officers. They were released from the program about 1 month early. During this time, both boys kept journals. Dylan had started his journal in March 1997. Eric restarted his website to focus only on video game levels and also began a journal. In their journals, they wrote about their thoughts, frustrations, and anger. In school, their schoolwork sometimes showed violent themes. In December 1997, Eric wrote a paper about school shootings. He also wrote a poem from the perspective of a bullet. Dylan wrote a short story about a man who killed students. The story worried his teacher so much that she contacted his parents. When they asked him about it, Dylan said it was just a story. Both boys were enrolled in video production classes at Columbine High School. They used school equipment to record videos. One video they made for an economics class was called Hitmen for Hire. In that video, they wore black trench coats and pretended to shoot at athletes outside the school. They also made another video showing themselves shooting guns at a place called Rampart Range. Eric kept a journal where he wrote about making explosives and testing them. He also wrote about his anger toward people he felt had left him out. Dylan wrote in his journal about feeling sad and lonely, and about wanting to end his life. On November 22, 1998, a friend named Robin Anderson went with them to a gun show. Because Eric and Dylan were not old enough to buy guns themselves, Robin bought a carbine rifle and 2 shotguns for them. Robin later told investigators she thought they wanted the guns for target shooting. She said she did not know about any plans for an attack. On January 23, 1999, Dylan bought a TC9 handgun from a man named Mark Maneys at another gun show. Mark Maneys was a co-worker at the pizza place where Eric and Dylan both worked part-time. Another co-worker, Philip Duran, helped arrange that sale. Eric's father once found a pipe bomb that Eric had made. Eric told his father it was for a school project. Eric continued to write about making bombs in his journal. Dylan also brought a pipe bomb to work one time and scared his co-workers. In the months before the attack, Eric and Dylan continued to buy supplies. They bought propane tanks and other materials. They stored weapons and bomb-making items in their homes. They kept videotapes in the basement of Eric's house. On those tapes they talked about their plans and about how they had hidden what they were doing from their families. On April 20th, 1999, the two went to Columbine High School. They were carrying weapons and bombs. On the morning of April 20th, 1999, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold arrived at Columbine High School before the lunch hour. They carried guns, knives, and bombs with them. Their plan was to set off large bombs in the school cafeteria during the busiest lunch period. They wanted to kill hundreds of students. When those bombs failed to explode, they started shooting. The first step was planting bombs. They placed 2 duffel bags in the cafeteria. Each bag contained a propane tank that had been turned into a bomb, along with pipe bombs and containers of gasoline. The bombs were set to explode at 11:15 a.m. when the lunch shift began. The school security camera was being given a new tape at around that time, so the placement of the bags was not recorded. No one saw the bags being added to the backpacks already in the cafeteria. They also placed 2 backpacks filled with pipe bombs and other explosives in a field about 3 miles south of the school. These bombs were meant to go off as a diversion, to draw firefighters and emergency workers away from the school. Some of those bombs did explode later, causing a small fire that was quickly put out. Firefighters then found the other bombs and warned police that there might be more devices that could explode if moved. After planting the bombs, Eric and Dylan changed clothes. Eric drove his car to the junior parking lot. Dylan drove his car to the senior parking lot. Both cars contained bombs made from propane tanks, pipe bombs, and gasoline containers. They intended these car bombs to explode later, after police and reporters had arrived. As Eric pulled into the parking lot, he saw Brooks Brown, a classmate he had known for years. Brooks noticed Eric was carrying a bag and asked why he was late for a test. Eric replied, "It doesn't matter anymore." Then he said, "Brooks, I like you now. Get out of here. Go home." Brooks felt uneasy and walked away. Eric and Dylan then put on their trench coats. Under the coats, they had strapped weapons to their bodies. Eric wore a white t-shirt with the words "Natural Selection" printed on it. Dylan wore a black t-shirt that said "Wrath." They carried bags filled with ammunition and more bombs. At 11:19 a.m., the cafeteria bombs were supposed to explode. They did not. The ignition systems had failed. Had those bombs gone off, they would have killed or badly hurt nearly 500 students in the cafeteria and could have caused part of the building to collapse. When the bombs failed, Eric and Dylan began shooting. They walked toward the west entrance of the school, which was near a grassy area where students were eating lunch. Rachel Scott, age 17, and her friend Richard Castaldo were sitting on the grass. Dylan threw a pipe bomb toward the parking lot. It only partially exploded and gave off smoke. Some students thought it was a prank. Then Eric and Dylan raised their guns. They shot Rachel and Richard. Rachel was hit 4 times and died instantly. Richard was shot 8 times and fell unconscious. He was left paralyzed below the chest. Nearby, 3 students named Daniel Rohrbaugh, Sean Graves, and Lance Kirkland were walking up the stairs toward the west entrance. They thought the shooters were using paintball guns. Eric fired 10 shots from his carbine rifle. Daniel Rohrbaugh, age 15, was killed. Sean Graves and Lance Kirkland were wounded. Lance was shot in the jaw later when Dylan came down the stairs and pretended to offer help. A teacher named William David Sanders was in the cafeteria when he heard the shooting. He began warning students to get to safety. Eric then fired toward a hill where other students were sitting. Michael Johnson was hit in the face, arm, and leg but ran away. Mark Taylor was shot in the chest, arms, and leg and fell to the ground, pretending to be dead. Dylan walked down the stairs with his shotgun. He stepped over Sean Graves, who was on the ground paralyzed, and said, "Sorry, dude." Dylan entered the cafeteria briefly. Officials later believed he went to check why the propane bombs had not gone off. He did not shoot anyone inside. He came back out and joined Eric. The two walked toward the west entrance, throwing pipe bombs in different directions. Only some of them exploded. A witness heard one of them say, "This is what we always wanted to do. This is awesome." Inside the school, art teacher Patty Nielsen heard the noise. She walked toward the west entrance with a student. When they opened the doors, the shooters shot out the windows. The student was cut by flying glass. Patty was hit in the shoulder by a piece of shrapnel. They ran down the hall into the library. Patty told students to hide under desks and called 911. At 11:22 a.m., a custodian called Deputy Neil Gardner, the school resource officer. Gardner drove to the senior parking lot. When he arrived, Eric fired 10 shots at him from about 60 yards away. Gardner fired back 4 times. Eric ducked, then came out and fired more shots. No one was hit. Gardner reported on his radio that there was a shooter in the building. Eric and Dylan then entered the school through the west entrance. They walked through the north hallway, throwing pipe bombs and shooting at anyone they saw. Dylan shot Stephanie Munson in the ankle, but she was able to walk out. They shot out windows at the east entrance. Then they went back toward the west entrance and turned into the library hallway. William Sanders, the teacher, was helping students evacuate up a staircase. He reached the end of the hallway and gestured for students in the library to stay down. Then he saw Eric and Dylan coming. He turned and ran. Eric shot him twice in the back and neck. Sanders collapsed but was still alive. Dylan walked over and threw a pipe bomb toward him, then returned to Eric. Students and another teacher pulled Sanders into a classroom and tried to stop the bleeding. He remained there for 3 hours while students called police from a phone in the room. At 11:29 a.m., Eric and Dylan entered the library. 52 students, 2 teachers, and 2 librarians were inside. They walked to the computers. Kyle Velasquez, age 16, was sitting in a chair. Dylan shot him in the head and back with his shotgun, killing him. They put down their bags of ammunition and reloaded. They began walking between the tables. They shouted for people to stand up. One of them said, "Anybody with a white hat or a sports emblem on it is dead." White hats were worn by athletes. No one stood up. They shot out windows toward the police outside. Police fired back, but no one was hit. Dylan fired his shotgun at a table, wounding Patrick Ireland, Daniel Steepleton, and Mackay Hall. Eric walked to a computer desk. He fired his shotgun under the desk, killing Stephen Curnow, age 14, who was hiding there. He moved to the next desk and shot Casey Rugseger, age 17, through the shoulder. When she made noise, he told her to stop complaining. Eric went to a table where 2 students were hiding. He slapped the table twice, said peekaboo, and fired his shotgun, killing Cassie Bernal, age 17. His nose began bleeding from the gun's recoil. Dylan asked why he had done that. Eric went to the next table, where a student was sitting. He asked her if she wanted to die. She begged for her life. Dylan said shoot her, but Eric replied, "No, we're gonna blow up the school anyway." Dylan found a table where 3 students were hiding. He called out to Eric that he had found a nigger. They taunted Isaiah Shoels, age 18, using racial slurs. Then both fired. Eric shot Isaiah in the chest, killing him. Dylan shot and killed Matthew Kechter, age 16. The third student, Craig Scott, lay still in their blood and survived. Eric threw a small bomb onto another table. It landed on a student's leg. The student tossed it away, and it exploded in the air. Dylan moved to another part of the library. He fired his TC-9, hitting Mark Kintgen in the head and shoulder. He then fired his shotgun toward a table, wounding Lisa Kreutz, Lauren Townsend, and Valine Schnurr. Then he fired several more shots from his TC-9, killing Lauren Townsend, age 18. Valine Schnurr began screaming. Dylan asked her if she believed in God. She said she did. Dylan asked why, and said God is gay. Then he walked away. Eric went to another table. He shot 2 girls, wounding Nicole Nowlin and John Tomlin. John Tomlin moved out from under the table. Dylan shot him repeatedly, killing him. Eric walked to another table. He fired his shotgun, killing Kelly Fleming, age 16, who was sitting next to the table. He then fired again, hitting the already dead Lauren Townsend, wounding Lisa Kreutz again, and wounding Gina Park. The two moved to the center of the library to reload. Eric pointed his gun under a table. The student there asked if they were going to kill him. Dylan recognized him as an acquaintance and told him to run. The student fled. Eric then fired his carbine at another table, hitting Daniel Mauser, age 15, in the hand and ear. Daniel tried to push a chair at Eric. Eric fired again, hitting Daniel in the face and killing him. Eric fired 3 more shots under another table, wounding Jennifer Doyle and Austin Eubanks. Dylan then fired 1 shot, killing Corey DePuter, age 17. By 11:36 a.m., 10 students were dead in the library. 12 others were wounded. Eric and Dylan walked out. They went to the science area and set a fire in a storage closet. A teacher hiding nearby put the fire out. At 11:44 a.m., school security cameras showed them re-entering the cafeteria. Eric fired his gun toward the propane bombs, trying to make them explode. They did not. Dylan lit a Molotov cocktail and threw it at one bomb. A gallon of fuel attached to the bomb caught fire, but the sprinklers put it out a few minutes later. They left the cafeteria and walked through the hallways, shooting at walls and ceilings. They went into the main office, and then back into the hallways. At 11:56 a.m., they returned to the cafeteria and went into the kitchen. They came out and went back upstairs. At 12:02 p.m., they re-entered the library. Only Patrick Ireland, who was unconscious, and Lisa Kreutz, who was wounded, were still inside. Eric and Dylan fired at police through the library windows. Police returned fire. No one was hit. By 12:05 p.m., all gunfire from the shooters stopped. At 12:08 p.m., Eric Harris sat with his back against a bookshelf, put his shotgun in his mouth, and fired. He died instantly. Dylan Klebold knelt on the floor, put his TC-9 against his left temple, and fired. He also died instantly. The shooting had lasted 49 minutes from the first shots outside. During that time, Eric had fired 121 shots. Dylan had fired 67 shots. In total, 13 people were killed by the shooters, 12 students and 1 teacher. 24 other people were wounded by gunfire. 3 more were hurt while trying to escape. The 2 shooters took their own lives. After the shooting stopped, police outside the school did not know whether the shooters were still alive or whether more bombs were about to explode. Officers had surrounded the building, but did not enter immediately. SWAT teams began entering the school at 1:09 p.m., moving from classroom to classroom. They found students and teachers hiding in locked rooms. They also discovered the bodies of the shooters in the library around 3:30 p.m. The bomb squad worked through the day and night to disarm explosives left in the cafeteria, in the parking lot, and in the shooters' cars. 1 pipe bomb accidentally detonated inside a disposal trailer later that evening, but no one was injured. As police searched the school, they collected evidence including the guns, ammunition, bomb materials, journals, and the videotapes Eric and Dylan had recorded in the basement of the Harris home. Those tapes, later called the basement tapes, showed the two discussing their plans, their reasons, and how they had hidden their weapons from their parents. Investigators also recovered computer files, including Eric's journal and the website where he had written about his anger and his bomb-making. In the weeks after the shooting, investigators looked into how the two had obtained their weapons. They learned that Robin Anderson, a friend, had bought a rifle and 2 shotguns for them at a gun show because they were too young to buy guns themselves. She told investigators she believed the guns were for target shooting and had no knowledge of the planned attack. She was not charged with any crime. Mark Maneys, who had sold Dylan the TC9 handgun, was arrested. Philip Duran, the co-worker who had helped arrange that sale, was also arrested. Both were charged with supplying a handgun to a minor and possession of a sawed-off shotgun. They pleaded guilty. Mark Maneys was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Philip Duran was sentenced to 4.5 years. The investigation also revealed that in 1997, more than a year before the shooting, a Jefferson County Sheriff's investigator had drafted an affidavit to search the Harris home after seeing Eric's website. That affidavit was never submitted to a judge, and no search was conducted. Years later, the original documents were lost and later found again, leading to criticism of the sheriff's office. Victims' families and survivors filed lawsuits against the shooters' families, the sheriff's office, and the school district. Many of those lawsuits were dismissed because government agencies had legal immunity. One case was not dismissed. The family of teacher Dave Sanders argued that police knew the shooters were dead, but still prevented paramedics from reaching him for hours. That case was settled in 2002 for $1.5 million. In April 2001, more than 30 victims' families accepted a settlement of nearly $2.54 million from the families of Eric Harris, Dylan Klebold, Mark Maneys, and Philip Duran. The Harris and Klebold families paid from their homeowners' insurance policies. The family of victim Isaiah Shoels initially rejected the settlement, but was later ordered by a judge to accept $366,000. Other families reached separate settlements with the shooters' families. The shooting led to widespread changes in how police respond to active shooters. Instead of surrounding a building and waiting for SWAT teams, officers began training to move toward the sound of gunfire immediately to stop the shooter as quickly as possible. This tactic, called immediate action rapid deployment, became standard across the country. Schools also adopted new security measures. Many installed metal detectors, hired more resource officers, and created zero-tolerance policies for threats or weapons on campus. Anti-bullying programs were expanded, and new laws were proposed to close the gun show loophole that had allowed the shooters to buy firearms through a friend. In 2007, a permanent memorial was opened in Clement Park near the school. It honored the 13 people killed by the shooters. The library where most of the deaths occurred was torn down and replaced with an atrium. A new library, called the Hope Columbine Memorial Library, was built next to the school. The two shooters died by their own hands on April 20th, 1999, and no criminal charges were filed against them. Their accomplices served their prison sentences and were released. The victims' families and the survivors carried the weight of the massacre for years afterward. One survivor, Anne-Marie Hockelter, who was paralyzed in the shooting, died in February 2025 from medical complications related to her injuries, and her death was officially ruled a homicide connected to the attack, bringing the total number of victim fatalities to 14. The story of what happened at Columbine High School on that day remains a part of American history, remembered for the lives that were lost and for the changes it forced upon schools and law enforcement across the nation.